Good morning, and thank you all for being here. This is the DAO's early week, usually Monday, press conference in which we talk about two things. First, we talk about data, especially data around gun violence. But second, we talk about an individual or an important or a pressing issue. I don't think we've ever talked about a case that was more troubling and more serious and more heartbreaking than this one. And we will get into the details of this. But first I want to start out showing you a map. And I want to show it to you for a reason. What you're about to hear today, after we cover the data, is about a group known as the Big Naddy Gang. It's about a number of shootings. It is about a sentencing that has occurred now for 3 out of 4 participants in these shootings. The 4th is in federal court facing charges there, in which there were very, very serious consequences. Those 3 individuals, we'll get to in a minute, have received sentences that range from 30 to 60 years to 40 to 80 years. They were young when they committed their crimes, 16, 17, and 18. But these crimes are horrific. They are atrocious. And it is a tribute to the excellent work that has been done by the Gun Violence Task Force, represented here by Bill Fritzie and Joe Lanuti. It's a tribute to all their collaborators. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms played a tremendous role here. Philadelphia Police Department, as always. The Gun Violence Task Force, of course, works as well with state agents. I will let them explain in more detail the credit to be shared, because there is a lot of credit to be shared in terms of the investigation and the prosecution of these cases. But all these people they all pled guilty. And they pled guilty for a reason, because the investigation was so overwhelming that they didn't have a choice, and that's how it should be. Our investigations should be so deep, have such integrity. There should be so many layers that someone who has done something terrible, even if their judgment is the judgment of a young person, even if they've made terrible decisions in the past, what they should be doing is this. And that is not how it has always been with cases at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We are seeing more and more with our Gun Violence Task Force cases, our homicide non-fatal shooting cases, that the consequence of a heavy emphasis on forensics and the consequence of doing deep dive investigations is not just seen on the street, and I'll get to that in a second, but it's also seen in the courtroom, where these cases are resolving and therefore moving the system more quickly and achieving consequence more quickly. But let's look at this map for a second. So we will be talking about a group of cases. As you can see, we have specific addresses, dates, locations, names of the participants listed, and we also have a point reflected with a red dot where the shootings actually occurred. As you can see, they're within a relatively small area of a big city. And as I'm sure you can imagine, as you look at a map, this impersonal thing, those neighborhoods were devastated. So who lives there? Who are these people? The kids doing math homework, hearing shots. It's their parents closing the curtains, locking the door one more time. It's seniors who, because of their vulnerability, already feel a little uneasy at times, even when they just leave the house to go somewhere. And this terror was happening around them. You will hear about the killing of Chandra Jones, as part of this series of events, a completely 100% utterly innocent bystander whose family, Tiffany Samuels, who served as her aunt, is here today. You're going to hear about the horrible things that happened to her and her friends when they were simply seated in a car and were, for no good reason, mistaken for the target of a targeted shooting. Tiffany Samuels has said, "For me, it's just senseless. It's just senseless. It was wrong in two ways. Just completely immoral, illegal, horrific. It's also the wrong person. That's the second way it's wrong." She has also said to me, these three defendants who got these sentences were young guys who, rather than being mentored in a positive way, were manipulated by an older guy. That older guy is Jaleel Williams. He's not one of the people sentenced here because he's in federal court, where he's indicted and facing RICO charges. That is racketeering, influence, corrupt organization charges. I won't get into the details, but he's facing a severe consequence in federal court, just as these young men did, and he should. And it's one more reminder of why it is so important to mentor young people with positive mentors, not with vampires. Let me just turn then, if I may, for a moment. Awful though this news is, awful though this story is, let me just turn for a moment, because we do have to be able to hold two things at one time, to what our data shows today. Why? Because we have to be able to hold two things at once. We have to be able to recognize the harm. We have to be able to bring the appropriate, just consequence that will hopefully deter and stop other people when they see that you do this stuff and you get caught. When they see that if you join the Big Naddy Gang, that gang gets crushed. And it has gotten crushed by this prosecution. But we also have to always try to prevent the next victimization, because the only real justice is when there is no victimization. There is no shooting in the first place. And what do we see today? Well, I say this with humility and caution because you never know what's coming next. But what we see today is that as of the midnight last night, March the 9th, 2025, there were 37 homicides in the city of Philadelphia. How does that compare to other years? What we are looking at here, and I would encourage anyone in the city of Philadelphia or outside who is interested in the truth, who wants to know the facts, which have always been our focus. What we are looking at here is available to everyone. It's on their cell phone, it's on their laptop. This is the Philadelphia Police Department's publicly available database. You can see how to get there right here, phillypolice.com/crime-data/crime-statistics. And you don't have to put all that in to get there. You'll get there pretty quickly. What is the Philadelphia Police Department showing? They're showing homicides as of March the 9th, 2025, down 35%, a total of 37, as compared to what? As compared to last year. Last year there were 57 homicides on this date. How does that rank when we look at the last 18 years, which is the number of years that the police department shows? Marissa, may we go right on the homicides year-to-date numbers? If you're looking for a number below 37, you won't find it. In fact, the closest you're going to get, and this continues if you go even farther right, you'll get 39 in the year 2013. The year 2013, as best I can tell, is the lowest in the last 50 years, maybe 55. And today, the city of Philadelphia has fewer homicides than we had on this date in the lowest year of the last 55 years. That is obviously encouraging. It is simply one more reason to try harder, to push harder, and to make sure that we keep holding two things at once. Now, I would also like to look at the comparison of other violent crime and other crime in relation to last year. And this is what you will find. I do want to point out that these are updated frequently. The Philadelphia Police Department's publicly available database is something I look at every day for a reason, which is that it updates every day. And we find some interesting things. First of all, at the top, we have violent crime. Overall, violent crime this year compared to last year, which was a record year for improvement in public safety, down over 12%. What about property crime? Well, that's down over 10%. When we look at shooting incidents, down 28.5%. We look at shooting victims, down 22% plus, and that's compared to last year, which was, by percent, the biggest public safety improvement in homicides in the city of Philadelphia in its entire recorded criminological history, right? This is unusual, put it that way. As we go through the individual lines, and you will find, I believe, a total of 18 lines here: homicide, other violent crimes, totals, property crimes, etc. As you go through all of them, every single one is down but one. Every single one. So, as we talk in further detail about the end of the Big Naddy Gang, the crushing of the Big Naddy Gang, about these young people receiving an appropriately serious consequence for horrific actions, as we talk about it, we always have to recognize that the work is not done until there are no homicides. So the work is not done. That's just how it is. But we also need, in an evidence-based way, to see whether things are working or not. And all that I can really tell you honestly is that as of midnight, February 9th, 2025, there are remarkable improvements. If you have 20 fewer homicides, 37 this year, as compared to last year when there were 57 on this date, you have about 2 lives saved a week over that period of time. We can only work as hard as we can and collaborate as much as we can with community-based organizations, with coaches, with school teachers, with houses of faith, with our law enforcement partners, and with government. We can only run as fast as we can to try to keep that going in the right direction. Now, having said that, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you and identify some of the people here, and we will hear very shortly from 2 of them, Bill Fritzie and Joe Lanuti of our Gun Violence Task Force. We have with us First Assistant DA Robert Listenby, ADA Bill Fritzie, who's the chief of the Gun Violence Task Force, is here, as well as ADA Joe Lanuti, who is, in addition to being involved in this case, effectively serving as the assistant chief of that unit. We have ADA Bob Wainwright, who is the chief of the DAO's Homicide Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. Tania Leonard is here. She is the director of the DAO's CARES unit, which of course works very intensively with the families of homicide victims in the first 45 days in particular. And we have with us Tiffany Samuels, who is the aunt, the family of Chandra Jones, who passed away, unfortunately, due to homicide by these people in her 30s. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce ADA Bill Fritzie and ADA Joseph Lanuti, who will come forward, and they will speak in more detail about Dante Sutton, Jameer Brunson Gans, Elijah Soto, and also a bit about Jaleel Williams.
Good morning, everyone. I want to first start and kind of explain really the difference between a gun violence task force prosecution versus our colleagues over in the homicide non-fatal shooting unit. And a lot of it has to do with our partnership with ATF, FBI, Philadelphia Police Department, obviously, and the Office of Attorney General. None of these cases could have been done without the excellent work of the detectives on the scene and the first responding officers who collected the evidence, took the photos, and spoke to the witnesses. Without them, we would not have been able to piecemeal this together in order to get these effective arrests and prosecution. And I especially want to thank Commissioner Bethel, DC Venor, Inspector Ransom, and Chief Kearney with our shooting investigation group and our homicide detectives that allow us as task force attorneys to do this work with them. What this allows us to do as prosecutors is to not only just arrest one individual at a time for one shooting that they did. Instead, we're arresting every shooter at the same time for every shooting that they did or every possible shooting that they've done. And what that allows is for us to build stronger cases that we bring in for prosecution. This case, from the time of arrest to sentencing, took about 1.5 years, and that was without a witness being called. And so that's a testament to the amount of evidence that was recovered not only at the crime scene, but additional evidence that was recovered through our other partners. And in this case, ATF assisted with a task force officer, Detective Hartman, who was involved in the prosecution. So again, a little bit different type of investigation where we do these group-involved investigations to try and bring in a group of people and try and solve and cut down on the violence in those neighborhoods effectively. And that's what this prosecution led to. So again, I want to thank everybody for their participation and thank them again for letting us as prosecutors work with them on these cases.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Assistant District Attorney Joe Lanuti, and I'm here to announce the convictions and sentencings of 3 individuals, Dante Sutton, Jameer Brunson Gans, and Elijah Soto. If you recall, they were charged back in May of 2023 for homicides and shootings in the North Philadelphia area. We then presented the information to the investigating grand jury where they were identified as members of the group known as BNG, or the Big Naddy Gang. They ultimately pled guilty, and last month they were sentenced by the Honorable Charles Ehrlich. I will take you through each one of these defendants one by one. Dante Sutton, who was 17 at the time of these shootings, was convicted and sentenced for 3 counts of third-degree murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of robbery, criminal conspiracy, and firearm violations. Sutton's criminal conduct caused 3 deaths, 5 shooting victims, and 2 carjacking victims. He received an aggregate sentence of 40 to 80 years. Jameer Brunson Gans, who was 18 at the time of these shootings, was convicted and sentenced for 2 counts of third-degree murder, 3 counts of aggravated assault, criminal conspiracy, and firearms violations. His criminal conduct caused 2 deaths and 3 shooting victims. He received an aggregate sentence of 35 to 70 years. Elijah Soto, who was 16 at the time of these shootings, was convicted of 3 counts of third-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, 2 counts of aggravated assault, and firearms violations. His criminal conduct caused 3 deaths and 2 shooting victims. He received an aggregate sentence of 30 to 60 years. If you could please pull up the map. This map here shows the crimes that they ultimately pled guilty to and were sentenced to. This wasn't the entirety of the BNG investigation. These were just these 3 defendants. We have 2 other individuals who are awaiting trial, but these are the incidents that these 3 individuals committed. All 3 of these individuals killed Jordan Murray on September 6, 2021. This was at 22nd Street in Huntington. It was at the 33 bus stop on that corner. Murray was gunned down in the street. Medical examiners found at least 9 gunshot wounds on his body. The reason for this killing was an argument over social media, specifically Instagram. When it comes to Dante Sutton and Elijah Soto, both participated in the homicide on September 18th, 2021 at 2900 York Street. Jarek Jenkins was shot and killed at that location. The reason of this shooting was BNG was brought into a neighborhood beef that they were not a part of. Jarek Jenkins was not identified as a gang member, but was supposedly friends with someone in the area. All three of these defendants shot and killed Chandra Jones and shot two other female victims on September 29th, 2021 at 33rd and Diamond Street here in Philadelphia. At this point, BNG had earned a reputation for their violence among the North Philadelphia groups, and they were specifically essentially recruited by Jaleel Williams, who is the leader of a subset known as Omerta, a subset of the group known as Zoo Gang. Williams has been indicted federally, as the district attorney told you, by our federal partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office for homicide, RICO, and related charges. The BNG members were promised thousands of dollars to commit a murder for hire that evening. Some of the BNG members acted as lookouts. They went to a location known as the 7-Star Lounge over on West Sargent Street. Other members of this group waited outside as gunmen. Meanwhile, the female victims who were not the targets were celebrating a birthday at the 7-Star Lounge. There was a miscommunication between the lookouts and the shooters. They ended up following the wrong vehicles leaving that club. They followed them to an area of 33rd and Diamond. We can see pictured here on the right, Chandra Jones' vehicle. It was a white vehicle. The BNG members all fired upon that vehicle. There were at least, based on ballistic evidence, 49 shots fired at that vehicle. It was not until the following day when they realized that they shot the wrong people. I want to thank our law enforcement partners who made this happen. This was an investigation led by Detective Timothy Hartman. He's a task force officer for the ATF. I'd also like to thank Paul Haggerty. He's our GVTF, one of our GVTF criminal forensic analysts who pour over the mountains of digital evidence in an investigation like this. We also had considerable assistance by the Philadelphia Police Department, specifically the Shooting Investigation Group and homicide detectives, the Attorney General's Office, and the U.S. Marshals. I would like to thank the victims' families who showed great courage and patience throughout these proceedings. During these sentencings, they gave impactful statements that showed great character on behalf of their loved ones, as well as our city. The fact of the matter is, it only takes one moment to pull a trigger and take a life, but these types of investigations often take years. While we cannot save the victims in this case, I'm confident that BNG would have continued their shooting spree until investigators made them stop. We may never know how many lives were saved from the long nights and hard days that these investigators poured into this investigation, and for that I am deeply grateful. I will now turn it back over to the District Attorney.
All right, thank you so much for explaining that situation. Certainly, we have spoken previously. I just have a couple comments, and then we'll get straight to Q&A. But we've spoken previously about 0 to the 4, a shooting group that used to, I almost said occupied. That's actually kind of right. That used to be a disaster between 60th Street and 64th Street. Think of them as an occupying army of the worst kind. Maybe that's what they were. Well, 0 to the 4, going to go to the jail, is something we said, and then they went to the jail. And then there were the young bag chasers, YBC, chasing a bag of money. Apparently, the only way they thought to get it was with guns. Well, they're gone too. And speaking of gone, Big Naddy Gang. Just so you know a little bit about that name, the Big Naddy was a young man who got murdered, and apparently some of these defendants and some other people thought that was at least a pretty good story about why they needed to shoot other people. BNG, bad guys, now gone. That's your new name. That's what you get now. It's just such a shame for everyone involved. The reality, though, is that these young men who won't even see a parole hearing for 30, 35, 40 years, the reality is it's better than being dead, and that's where they were going. They were in all likelihood going to end up dead, and quickly. So hopefully, in this process of reckoning, in this process of accountability, in this process of consequences, hopefully what we have seen is at least a partial restoration of a community, a neighborhood, a situation where kids can do homework. Hopefully. And maybe, who knows, even save the lives of some killers. All right. Are there questions? Alan Wheeler of 3CBS. All right, thank you, sir. Amy Brenholtz. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Oh, great, thank you. Cristobal Mora. No questions? Oh, in Espanol, okay. Thank you. Do you want to do that afterwards then, or do you want to do it now?
No.
Afterwards, okay, very good. Channel 29, Fox, Pete Santo.
No questions, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Sherry Stone, Abdul Suleiman. Are there any questions?
Let's see. You probably can't say who the intended target was, no, but not people who did,
Let me see. We like to give as much information as makes sense. So let me see if I can get you some more information on that. The answer might be no, but let me find out.
We could say that we're at the club that night.
Thank you for the question. The answer is, while we will not name those individuals, the individuals who were targets were at a club that night, and the reason this particular car was shot up with 3 women who had nothing to do with anything involving B&G is that these defendants were so reckless and so careless in what they were doing that if it was a white car, that was enough for them. That much I can say. And that is how this horrific incident occurred. Do you have any other questions, Ms. Stone? All right, thank you. 65 Univision, is it Geisha Torres?
Yeah, but no question after in Spanish.
Okay. All right. Well, that being the case, you good? Okay. That being the case, thank you all for being here, and I want to give a special thanks to the family, the aunt. I'm not going to say her name over and over and over because, well, I'm just not going to do it. Sometimes enough is enough. But I want to give a special thank you to family of Chandra Jones, who have been through the worst thing you could go through.